I was contemplating taking my life. I had such survivor guilt, even after being out of Vietnam for 30 some years. I never pulled more than about 2 Gs,
Yeah.
but for most people, that's enough.
It was enough
So,
for me.
Yeah, it's more than I want.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm scared to death of heights. So the audience knows a Gold Star family is the remaining family of a veteran who passed away.
that's correct, yeah. Gene was in Operation Market Garden. And we had a guy who came out, and he was a Vietnam vet. Had seen a lot of action. Back in Vietnam days, normally you just went for one tour and you were done. You were over there for 6 months, boom, kick you out.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys that went back several times. He was not going to leave his troops. And we do a whole different thing now than when I was with you. It was just me. Okay. Now we have a big group of people that come out.
That's amazing.
We actually call it an honor flight, and we have a little ceremony we do before. And these are things I learned from the American Legion. I try to do kind of the same sort of thing. We have a moment of silence for those. We have a memory table set up. We do the Pledge of Allegiance. We pray. And one of the other things I do is ask them, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah.
And either they want to talk about it a little bit, they brag about it, or a lot of times, like this guy who had several very close friends die in close proximity,
Yeah.
he didn't want to talk about it. He was very quiet. And took him for the flight. He came back and he didn't shut up. Wow. And he called me about 2 weeks later and said, just thanking me for what he did. And he says, I want you to know something. He goes, I was contemplating taking my life. I had such survivor guilt, even after being out of Vietnam for 30 some years,
Yeah.
he still had that. And he says, I had no idea that many people cared about veterans. We were lucky. We had a big group that day. We probably had 50 people that showed up,
Yeah.
and they were cheering him on and clapping for him, and just, and we, at the time, we had a full-time videographer and photographer, so he got to see the whole thing on Facebook again. And then a couple of weeks after that, they moved. They were from Minnesota, I believe, and were down here for the winter. And a couple of weeks after that, his wife was the one that called me up and said, I don't know what you did up there, but he has not stopped talking. He said, we've been married for over 40 years. I'm hearing stories I've never heard before.
Yeah.
And she goes, it opened him up, and he's like a totally different person.
Yeah.
That's
He's
incredible.
The happiest our marriage has ever been has been the last month.
One act of kindness saved a
Yeah.
life and completely changed it.
Yeah. And I just say, it's all God. It wasn't me. This just got thrown in my lap. I never knew it was going to be like this. I thought it was just a fun thing for me to do, because when I originally bought the airplane, I did air shows for 16 years. So my original thought was to get back into air shows. Mm-hmm. And then my wife sat me down and said, no, you have 3 children. You are not getting back in air shows. We've unfortunately lost a lot of friends over the years. And I just said, well, what the heck am I going to do with a World War II airplane?
Right.
And like I said, that kid showed up, and the rest is history.
That's amazing. And it's true. When you get out, and we had kind of discussed this a little bit about like the VSOs, and I don't drink. I don't want to go hang out at a bar slinging cheap drinks. And it's, nothing against those folks. I'm former chaplain of the VFW.
Yeah.
And I don't like cycling in negativity. I don't like sitting around and attempting to one up each other. If there's camaraderie,
I've been there. I know what you're talking
right.
about.
If there's camaraderie amongst brothers and sisters, like in arms, awesome. I'm there for that for sure. I just don't want to sit around and drink swell vodka or swill vodka.
Yeah, right.
And talk about how rough I have it, or comparative. Like, I mean, I was in Iraq 2008 to 2009. Nope, sorry, 2009 to 2010, and I'd go to a VFW and have to hear, "Oh, you guys had it easy," and it's like, okay, and so for me that wasn't great. But if what you're doing is creating the environment for veterans to be together, for veterans to have a wild experience, because it's not just you fly up, you turn around, you land. Like, they get a whole experience, and you know,
Well, that's one of the things I always ask them before we go. I go, do you like roller coasters?
right?
And if they say yes, I go, oh, we're going to have fun.
Yeah,
And I don't do anything crazy. I show them what G forces are like. We do tight turns. I show them basically what these kids would learn when they came over here, to fly. I was lucky enough, I found an actual instruction manual for the British pilots that flew out of Falcon Field back in 1941.
yeah,
And it shows several of the maneuvers that they would do on their very first day. And they had to teach these, they had to basically find out if they were going to get airsick or there were going to be other problems, because if you were going to be flying a fighter, you're going to be doing aerobatics.
right.
And you're going to be doing some, crazy flying. So I just, we do wing overs and tight turns and things like that. So I never pull more than about 2 Gs.
Yeah.
But for most people, that's enough.
It was enough for me.
Yeah, it's more than I want.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm scared to death of heights. And you asked me that exact question. Do you like roller coasters? And I said, no, but give me what you got. And so we went on a whole trip. And yeah, I mean,
It's such a historical area too. So even if they say no, I can show them, a lot of the things in Arizona, like the Arizona sign. There's a great story about that involved the military. I take them over the lakes and, show them the lakes. I show them Weaver's Needle and give them a little history about the Lost Dutchman mine, things like that. And then we fly alongside the Superstition Mountains, so it's a great place for them to be able to take video and photos. Everybody's got a cell phone now, so even just the regular ride is fun. And that's kind of where the Gold Star family flights came in. I actually had a friend on Facebook. I'd never met him personally, but we were friends on Facebook, and I was actually thinking about going to work for the same company he was working for. It was a contractor flying out of where were they flying out of? I think Sudan or somewhere. But his base was overrun, and unfortunately he was killed along with his co-pilot. And his wife, I could just see, was was having a tough time.
So the audience knows a Gold Star family is the remaining family of a veteran who passed away.
That's correct, yeah. And anyway, and he wasn't really a veteran. He was a contractor, but he got veteran status or Gold Star status because of what they were doing.
Yes, sir.
And his wife, Hope, I hope she doesn't mind me talking about it, but we've become friends over the years, and I'm pretty much like an uncle to her daughter. It's just it's just a wonderful family.
Yes, sir.
I just called her up one day and I said, would you like to experience kind of like what Dustin experienced? And she says, yeah, and came out. It was very emotional. The news people found out about it, so the news people were out and filmed the whole thing, and I took her up for a ride and just, and it was very tearful for her, to see this. And then ended up taking the little girl up for a ride. She's 8 now. I think she was 3 back then.
Yeah.
And took her up for a ride in another airplane that we had. It wasn't a warbird. It was just a, private type of airplane. And I said, I want to do more of this too. So we started the Gold Star flights with, and then a friend of mine had the 4-seat IER 823, which is the Romanian airplane, which was perfect for that. It's a warbird, but I can carry 3 people at a time. And again, it's fully aerobatic. It's like I said, it was basically a frontline fighter attack aircraft. And so you can still do all the same maneuvers and everything with that airplane. So it's become fun, and we've done several Gold Star families. And I made friends with, I'm friends with so many people now that I never would have met in normal life. One of my favorites is Gene Metcalf. Gene is a World War II veteran. He's 103. If you live in Fountain Hills, be careful, because I hear he still drives. And sadly just lost his wife, so I'm going to be going to the memorial for that soon. But Gene was in Operation Market Garden, and one of my friends from work, he was a customs officer that I'd met going back and forth when I was flying overseas, called me. They was his next door neighbor, called me up and said, hey, can we get Gene a ride for his birthday? He's going to be 96. And I'm like, can he get in the airplane? He goes, oh, this guy still drives and cuts his own grass,
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah. So we brought him out, and he was our very first World War II veteran. And like I said, I'm still friends with him, talk to him all the time. This guy, talk about a hero. He was the only guy in his group that survived Operation Market Garden they were like basically special forces. They became, I think it was the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Division. Anyway, he was a grenade blew up next to him, knocked him out, and blew out his eardrum, and he was bleeding out his ear. So his people thought that he was gone. So they just left him there, and they all ended up getting killed. He was captured by an SS stormtrooper and brought back to this castle that they have as basically a prison camp area there.
Yeah.
And he was actually interviewed by Heinrich Himmler.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, he was put into a prison camp and ended up 8 months later. He said Patton came by and blew the door off or gate off the prison camp. And anyway, he says they freed us and said, we're going to fly you back to England. And he says, nope, not getting in another airplane. So Gene, being an outgoing type of a guy, stole bicycles all across Europe to get back to England. He said, I got really good at stealing bicycles. I would leave a note and say, I'm really sorry, but this was the only transportation I could find or afford. And in the meantime, had met his wife over, I think in France, is where he met her. That they were married for years. He played football for USC and did all these other amazing things, was an art teacher and an artist here. But I mean, these are the type of people that I meet,
Yeah.
And I mean, they just become friends and heroes. Another one, Dick Tolliver, he was the president of the Tuskegee Airmen Association for years. He was actually taught to fly by the original Tuskegee Airmen.
That was
which was-
actually my unit in Iraq was the Tuskegee
kidding.
Airmen.
Oh, for gosh, that's
Yeah.
great, yeah. And Ben Davis was the general that was in charge of the 113th when I was at Andrews Air Force Base. So I get to know him. Well, I didn't really get to know him. I listened to him talk once in a while, but I actually had him on my airplane at American years later. And he came up and started talking to us, and I didn't even recognize him, And once he started talking, I went, "Oh my God!" I said, "You're Chappie Davis," and he just starts laughing. He says, "I haven't heard that name in a long time." And I was like, "Well, I'm a World War II fan, so that's why I knew that name." Anyway, but Dick Tolliver came out for a flight, and Dick and I have been friends now for years. Just from that, he's in his late 80s now, and just an amazing person. But some of the World War II vets we've taken up have just you'll remember them the rest of your lives.
Yeah. Well, I actually, my dad knew Joe Foss
Oh, no kidding!
as
Wow.
well.
Yeah.
Joe Foss actually, there was a summer safety camp
Yeah.
where a firearm safety camp, and they would take 2 kids per state, and you had to be like endorsed by somebody, and Joe Foss actually endorsed me to go to that safety camp.
Wow. How cool is
And
that?
I was a stupid kid. I smoked cigarettes and told my dad I didn't want to go because then I would have to quit smoking. But he didn't know any of this, and so I didn't admit it. And he still gives me a hard time to this day about it. However, yeah, he knew Joe Foss, and
Wow.
that's a pretty amazing name.
Yeah, I've heard him speak several times.
Yeah.
He was an amazing guy.
Yeah. And is he still like the highest confirmed
I believe
in US
so.
history?
Yeah, I believe so. Well, yeah, I think he was, yeah.
Yeah, he was something like
Because he fought everywhere.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
If there was a battle, he wanted to go. I always laugh. There was a great movie called He Loves War. Steve McQueen was a B-17 pilot. I don't think it was a very acclaimed movie, but for pilots, we always look for every movie out there. But
Right.
that always reminded me. I always wondered if that movie was actually about him. But he was a fighter pilot. He wasn't a bomber pilot. So.
They definitely should be making movies about Joe Foss.
Oh,
That
yeah,
man
and I'm
is
sure they will.
amazing.
And they're actually, I heard Steven Spielberg might be making a movie about Gene Metcalf. They did write a book. It's called Left for Dead in the Megan, which was where he parachuted in Holland during World War II. And he's actually a hero. He goes back every year for a big ceremony and basically has the key to the city. They fly him out there, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, my step grandfather was a pilot on the B-24 Liberator.
Yeah.
And they got shot down in Russian-held Poland, and he had to crash land the plane. Everybody survived. They ended up getting off the plane and everything, and they had to go through Russian-held Poland, went to France, Viva la Resistance, and
Oh, yeah.
made it back to England. And he was part of the 2nd Air Division, and so they ended up donating like a whole mansion to the 2nd Air Division Historical Society out in England.
Wow.
And so if you go see, the 2nd Air Division Historical Society in England at any point, that was my grandpa's mansion that they bought specifically for that.
No kidding.
My
Wow.
aunt was actually like the head of the 2nd Air Division Historic Society, and when they did the inauguration for the Air Force Memorial
Right.
in DC, my grandmother rather was sitting in the front row.
Oh, no kidding. How
Yeah.
cool is that?
There's
Yeah,
actually
I've been there several times. That's beautiful.
there's a pretty funny story about when I was in the military. I was in training. I'm sure you've probably heard people talking about peptides. It piqued your interest, you looked into it, but you don't know what source to trust. A lot of this stuff is coming out of China. If you're looking for a good quality peptide that's made in the United States, go to helixpure.com.